She said it so casually that I almost missed it. Almost. I was sitting at the kitchen table with my left wrist wrapped in its brace, watching my daughter move through my house with the efficiency of someone who had already decided how things would go. She'd been staying with me for 11 days by then. Ever since the fall in the driveway, ever since the urgent care visit, ever since she announced, in that particular tone she uses when her mind is made up, that I simply could not be left alone. It's just temporary. She told me that first evening, settling herself into my husband's old armchair as though she'd always belonged in it. Until the cast comes off. I nodded and said nothing. I am 74 years old. I spent 31 years as a bookkeeper for a manufacturing company in Dayton. I understand numbers, patterns, and the particular silence that comes just before something doesn't add up. The house around me has been mine since 1987. My late husband and I bought it the year our daughter started second grade, and I have tended it ever since. The wide plank oak floors, the Hoosier cabinet in the corner of the dining room, the collection of American art pottery that my husband began acquiring in the late 1970s, and that I had continued adding to after he passed. 43 pieces. I knew every one of them by name, provenance, and approximate value. I had updated the insurance appraisal myself just 2 years ago. So when my son-in-law arrived on a Tuesday morning with a man I didn't recognize, slight 40-ish, carrying a camera bag and a leather portfolio, I paid close attention. He's from a firm that does estate organization, my son-in-law explained, not quite meeting my eyes. Just to get everything cataloged properly. For your records. For my records, I had records, meticulous, color-coded, dated records. But I smiled and said, "How thoughtful, because I have learned over 7 decades that the best time to watch people is when they believe you are not watching." Hi there, I'm Melanie. When I first heard this story, it stopped me cold, because it could happen to any of us, in any house, with any family we thought we knew. Before we go on, tell me in the comments, has anyone ever tried to make decisions about your life without asking you first? I genuinely want to know. The man with the camera, I'll call him the appraiser, spent 3 hours moving through my home that first day. He photographed each piece of pottery. He opened the glass cabinet in the living room and held pieces to the light, turning them slowly. He wrote notes in a portfolio I was never shown. My daughter hovered nearby, offering him coffee, keeping the conversation light. My son-in-law took calls in the hallway, voice low. I sat in the wingback chair by the door, with a book open in my lap, and watched everything. That evening, after both of them had gone upstairs and the house had settled into quiet, I went to the dining room table, where the appraiser had left a printed sheet. His preliminary notes, I assumed, forgotten or left deliberately. I read it carefully under the lamp. The values were wrong, not slightly, substantially. A piece I knew to be worth between $8,000 and $12,000 based on comparable auction results was listed at $2,200. Another, a Roseville jardiniere in near-perfect condition, was listed at $800. I had paid more than that for it myself back in 2009, and values had only climbed since then. I set the paper down. I folded my hands in my lap. Someone was building documentation. Low documentation. The kind that makes a collection look modest on paper, while it is anything but modest in reality. I went to bed without saying a word. The next morning, I asked my daughter very pleasantly whether I might see the full report once it was completed. She was pouring coffee at my kitchen counter. Her shoulders went very slightly rigid, just for a moment, before she turned around with a smile. "Of course, when it's finalized." "And who commissioned it?" I asked. "Just so I have the paperwork for my insurance file." "We did," she said, "as a gift, to help you stay organized." She said it the way you'd explain something to a child. Gently, patiently, with just enough warmth to make the condescension feel like kindness. I thanked her. I finished my coffee. I went to my bedroom and opened the folder labeled insurance. Personal property that I keep in my filing cabinet, right where it has always been. My last appraisal, 43 pieces, total insured value, $187,400. The appraiser's sheet from the dining room table, 31 pieces listed. 12 were missing entirely. I held that number quietly for a long time. Then I put the folder away exactly as I'd found it and went to start the laundry. Because it was Tuesday and Tuesday was laundry day, and I was not going to give anyone a reason to look at me differently. The thing about a broken wrist is that it changes the geometry of your life in ways people don't always notice. I could not drive. I could not open certain jars. I could not manage much with my right hand at all, and I am right-handed. What I could do was listen, walk, read, think, and use a tablet, as long as I held it carefully with my left hand. My son-in-law had set up a shared tablet on the kitchen counter, so you can video call us if you need anything, he'd said, which had seemed odd given that he was sleeping 2 rooms away. I hadn't questioned it at the time, but I had started to notice, in small ways, that the easy conveniences in my own home were slowly becoming things that routed through him. On Wednesday afternoon, while my daughter was at the grocery store and my son-in-law was on a call in the yard, I picked up the tablet. He had forgotten to log out of his email. I am not a person who reads other people's private correspondence, but the subject line of the topmost message was visible before I had touched a single thing, and it read, Consignment Inquiry, Leland Oakhurst Auction House. I went very still. I read only what was visible on the screen without scrolling a single pixel. What I could see was enough. A reference to the Dayton collection, a proposed timeline, the phrase prior to formal listing. Prior to formal listing, meaning before it appeared anywhere, I might see it and object. I set the tablet down exactly where I had found it. I walked to the back porch and sat in the porch swing and looked at the yard my husband had planted 30-some years ago, and I breathed. I had not consigned anything. I had not spoken to any auction house. I had not authorized a single thing. Somewhere, paperwork was already moving without me. My neighbor across the street, Connie, has lived in her house for 22 years. She brought soup after my husband's funeral. She knows my car and my schedule and the particular way I hang my dish towels on the porch railing to dry in summer. She is the kind of neighbor people in cities don't believe exist anymore. She came by that Thursday with a tin of oatmeal cookies. My daughter answered the door. I heard them from the hallway. My daughter's voice pleasant, explaining that I was resting, that the wrist was healing well, that she would make sure to pass along the cookies and my thanks. I heard the door close. I was not resting. I was standing 8 feet away. The next afternoon, my daughter drove my son-in-law to a dentist appointment, a 1-hour window I had tracked carefully. The moment their car cleared the end of the driveway, I put on my shoes, walked across the street, and knocked on Connie's door. She took one look at my face and pulled me inside without a word. I told her everything, the appraiser and his incorrect figures, the 12 missing pieces, the email subject line I had seen on the tablet, the phrase prior to formal listing. Connie set down her tea mug. You need a lawyer, she said. I know, I said, but I've started to wonder about my phone, whether calls are being monitored through the house Wi-Fi. I can't prove it, but I don't want to use it. She was already standing up, going to the bookshelf where she keeps an old spiral address book with alphabet tabs. Use mine, she said, and set the book open on the table in front of me. Her nephew had used a firm downtown 2 years ago. The card was still there, tucked behind the V tab. Varga and Associates, Elder Law and Estate Litigation. I dialed. A woman answered, composed, professional. I told her my name, that I was 74, that I had a collection of American art pottery being appraised without my authorization, that I had seen an email referencing a consignment inquiry at an auction house submitted in my name, and that I had signed nothing. A pause. Are you safe to speak right now? She asked. I have about 35 minutes, I said. I heard her pull up something on a computer. Do not sign anything, she said, and the words came out so immediately that I understood she had heard some version of this before. And do not allow anyone to remove property from your home. Do you have the auctions house name? Leland Oakhurst, I said. A different kind of pause this time. They're reputable, which means if they receive a dispute notification, they'll honor it immediately. I can contact them today. A breath. I'll need written authorization from you to represent you. Can your neighbor bring you to our office? Tomorrow morning, I said, before 10. We'll be ready. I hung up and sat for a moment at Connie's kitchen table with the afternoon light coming through the window over her sink. I felt something I hadn't felt in 11 days. Not relief, exactly. The thing that comes just before relief. The moment you realize the door is there, and you still have the key. I was back in my own house with my shoes off and a cup of tea in hand before my daughter's car turned back into the driveway. That evening, I was careful. I asked my son-in-law about his tooth. He said it was fine, a routine cleaning. I told my daughter the cookies Connie had sent were delicious. I went to bed at my usual time and lay in the dark going over everything I knew. 12 pieces missing from the appraiser's list. Market values suppressed to roughly 20% of actual worth on the pieces that were included. An auction house already contacted. A timeline in motion. My son-in-law's flooring business had been struggling. He'd mentioned it twice in the past year. Each time in the vague way, people mention things they don't want discussed. My daughter had cut back her hours at the practice she worked for. They had refinanced their own house 18 months ago. I had not asked questions then. Perhaps I should have. But sympathy is not the same as consent. And love does not override ownership. The next morning, I told my daughter I had a follow-up with the orthopedist. She offered to drive me. Connie already offered, I said pleasantly. I don't want to trouble you. Something moved across her expression. Very small, very quick. I don't mind, she said. You've done so much already, I said. I'll be fine. Connie picked me up at 9:15. My daughter stood on the porch and watched us pull away, and I did not look back. At the law office, I sat across from Ms. Varga, steady handshake, reading glasses pushed up on her head, the kind of woman who has seen enough to know exactly when to be calm and when to move fast. I placed on her desk my insurance appraisal, the appraiser's sheet I had retrieved from the dining room table, a photograph I had taken of the email subject line on Connie's phone, and a handwritten list of the 12 pieces not included in the preliminary notes. She read without interrupting me once. This, she said finally, tapping the insurance appraisal, is documentation of what you own. This, she tapped the appraiser's sheet, is documentation of what someone else wanted the record to show. And this, she tapped the photograph, tells us why. Can you stop it? I asked. The auction house will pause the consignment the moment they hear from us. She was already writing. I'm also going to send a letter to your daughter and son-in-law today by certified mail, informing them that you have retained counsel and that you are contesting any transfer of property initiated without your explicit written consent. I was home before noon. My daughter was in the kitchen. She looked at me the way she used to when she was 16 and trying to calculate what I knew. I recognized that look from a long time ago. Good appointment? She asked. Very productive, I said. 2 days later, the certified letter arrived. I was in the backyard, deadheading the roses when I heard my daughter's voice through the open kitchen window. High, tight, the way it gets when she is frightened. She has a lawyer, Forrest. She went to a lawyer. I kept my garden shears moving, cut and cut and cut. My son-in-law's voice came through lower, harder to make out. Then how did she even? She can't drive. I set the shears down and walked to the back door. When I came inside, they were both standing at the kitchen table, with the letter open between them. My daughter looked at me the way she has never looked at me in her life. Not like a child who has been caught doing something wrong, but like a stranger who has just realized she misjudged the ground she was standing on. You went to a lawyer, she said. I did, I said. Why would you do that without talking to us first? I pulled out a chair and sat down at my own kitchen table. My wrist ached. I folded my hands. I'd like to ask you the same question, I said, about the auction house. Silence. My son-in-law stared at the table. My daughter stared at me. The letter lay between us with its clean letterhead and precise language. It was going to be temporary, my daughter said finally. Her voice had gone very quiet. We needed to liquidate something quickly, just a few pieces. We were going to buy them back once Forrest's contract came through. Buy them back? With what money? I asked. She didn't answer. Were you going to tell me? I pressed. She looked at the window, at the roses, at anything but my face. We thought you wouldn't notice right away, she said. You have so much, you don't display most of it. I display every piece, I said. I know where every piece is, what it's worth, and what I paid for it. I kept those records myself. My son-in-law closed his eyes. The appraiser's numbers, I continued, keeping my voice level, were approximately 20% of actual market value. Someone who trusted that documentation would have had no idea what was actually being transferred. We weren't keeping all of it, my daughter said quickly. We were going to put the money back as soon as. It was my property, I said, and no one asked me. The kitchen held its quiet. The refrigerator hummed. The clock above the stove ticked. I want you to know, I said, that the auction house has already been notified of the dispute and the consignment has been suspended. I watched their faces. I also want you to understand what I am telling you right now, clearly and without any ambiguity. I did not consent to any of this. Not the appraisal. Not the consignment inquiry. Not the documentation submitted in my name. None of it. My son-in-law put his face in his hands. My daughter looked at me for a long moment. Then, are you going to press charges? She is my daughter. I taught her to read. I drove her to piano lessons for 6 years. I held her hand in the hospital the first time a pregnancy ended early, and I held her again the second time. I know every version of her face. I also knew what she had done. That, I said quietly, depends on what happens next. What happened next came quickly. Ms. Varga contacted Leland Oakhurst that same afternoon to confirm the suspension. The auction house had received a consignment inquiry submitted by my son-in-law, in my name, with a letter purportedly signed by me authorizing the transfer of 14 specific pieces from my collection. The letter bore a signature. It was not my signature. I have a mild tremor in my right hand. It developed gradually over the past 3 years, barely noticeable but present. And it shows in my handwriting in a particular way. Signature on that letter was too smooth, too controlled. Someone had studied an older sample of my handwriting and practiced from it, and they had gotten close. But they hadn't known about the tremor. Ms. Varga forwarded the analysis to the district attorney's office within 48 hours. My son-in-law did not wait to be contacted. He called Ms. Varga's office himself and asked what a cooperation agreement might look like. I was informed of the conversation, not consulted on it, which was appropriate. Some things pass out of the category of family matters when a forged signature enters the picture. My daughter came to me 2 evenings later. She sat in the wingback chair by the window, the same chair I had sat in while I watched the appraiser work, and she seemed smaller in it than I had ever seen her. "I'm sorry," she said. I let the words sit there between us for a moment. "I know you needed help," I said. "I would have given it if you'd asked." She shook her head. "We were embarrassed. We didn't want you to know how bad it had gotten." "I know. We told ourselves it was temporary, that you'd never have to find out, that we'd fix it and put everything back before." She stopped, pressed her lips together. "It got further along than it was ever supposed to. That is how these things work, I have found. They begin with a small decision that feels manageable, and then they compound." "You believed," I said, "that because I was 74 and widowed and couldn't drive myself to an appointment, I was also somehow finished. That my collection was already halfway out the door in some practical sense, even if the paperwork hadn't caught up yet." She didn't deny it. I looked at her for a long time. My daughter, the child of my life, sitting across from me in my own living room, unable to hold my gaze. "You didn't ask," I said. "That's the thing I keep returning to. Not what you needed the money for. Not even that you took it. You never once asked me." She cried then, the quiet kind that has no sound. I handed her a tissue from the side table. I did not reach for her hand. Love does not mean the absence of consequence. I had known that a long time ago in smaller ways, and I had tried to teach it to her, and I suppose she needed a larger lesson than I had managed to give. The investigation moved through the following weeks with the steady, impersonal pace of official processes. The district attorney's office declined to pursue the case to trial. After my son-in-law cooperated fully, he provided documentation of the entire scheme, including the appraiser he had engaged privately and every communication with the auction house. In exchange, charges were reduced. There would be no prison sentence. There would be a record, and there would be restitution, and there would be consequences that would follow them both for years. I was asked whether I found that sufficient. I told the assistant district attorney that what I found sufficient was having my property intact, my name cleared of any consignment I had not authorized, and the legal protections in place to ensure it could not happen again. He wrote that down carefully. Ms. Varga helped me restructure my estate documents. I established a revocable trust with an independent trustee, not a family member, holding authority over any major financial decisions involving my assets. I updated my advance healthcare directive. I put my collection through a new, fully independent appraisal, had it notarized, and submitted it to my insurer with every piece accounted for. 43 pieces. Every one of them documented. Every one of them mine. My daughter called 3 weeks after she and my son-in-law moved back to their own house. She didn't ask to come over. She just called to say she was thinking of me. I told her I was thinking of her too. That was true. I thought about her often, about the choices she had made, and about what I might have done differently, and about the ways that love and desperation can twist around each other until it becomes hard to see where one ends and the other begins. I don't have a clean answer for any of that. I may never. We did not talk for long, but we talked, and that felt like the beginning of something honest, even if it was quiet and fragile and very far from what we had been before. After I hung up, I went to the living room and stood in front of the glass cabinet. The Roseville Jardiniere. The tall Weller vase with the slip-painted iris that my husband drove 4 hours to buy at an estate sale in 1983. The small rookwood piece with the chip along the base that he called a character mark, because he said everything worth keeping had one. Every piece exactly where it had always been. I made myself a cup of tea and sat in the wingback chair, and the October light came through the window the way it does in Ohio in the fall, low and golden and very clear. They had assumed that because I was 74 and widowed and couldn't drive myself across town, I was also somehow already finished, that I was a signature to be approximated and a collection to be quietly redistributed before I had the opportunity to notice. They underestimated what 31 years of meticulous bookkeeping teaches a person about discrepancies. They underestimated what grief teaches a person how to sit with something heavy and not be undone by it. They underestimated, most of all, what it means to have built something, not to have inherited it, not to have had it given to you, to have worked for it and chosen it and cared for it, one piece at a time, across decades. That does not stop mattering at 74 or 84 or at any age that someone else decides to assign to you. My dears, I won't tell you what to feel about my daughter's choices. You'll find your own way to those feelings. But I will tell you this. Know what you have. Keep your own records. And if anyone ever tries to tell you that your concern is the confusion, when your concern is entirely correct, trust yourself anyway. And share this story if it meant something to you. And I'll see you in the next one.